What is good, all you cool cats and kittens? This is your Commissioner Tim back on your screen for the week 2 of the Power Rankings. So this week wasn't necessarily the fantasy output fireworks that we saw in week 1, but there were certainly some amazing fantasy themes that I wanted to cover. And before jumping into that and the Power Rankings, I do want to mention a couple things. First, importantly, regarding sort of a housekeeping item for our league, the proposal regarding the next year's potential expansion is almost complete. So in a few days, we will be sharing that in a written proposal for y'all to take a read. It will cover the proposed thoughts around the expansion draft, the draft lottery odds, along with any other suggested sort of course of action regarding the potential expansion to 10 teams for the next 2023 season. Brandon and I will also look to set up a group Zoom call should there be a lot of questions. We think it'd be better to answer all of them live in a single session. If not, if there's just a few questions, then we'll look to answer them and have it logged directly into the document for keeping and without all of us having to convene on Zoom together. So also overall, given that Brandon and my rosters are sort of on the opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the current roster strength along with the future assets, I think we've been able to find a good balance that minimizes the impediment of all of us, the existing managers, while allowing for the new incoming managers to feel they have the what I call the ability of movement, which means that they can either choose to tank and trade off their assets to build for the future, getting enough assets to be able to contend in the future window, or start off having enough assets to have the ability to contend for a playoff spot in their first year, especially as we move toward a standard 16 playoff league next year when we do have 10 roster spots. Okay, so now that the league's housekeeping open item is addressed, I want to talk about our power ranking video format, this one. So I'm going to keep looking to tinker it to make it more enjoyable and informative for the league. And I also want to make sure that we don't overlap with Commissioner Brandon's weekly recaps and predictions. So I spoke a lot about each manager's highlight players last week, but going forward, I'll be looking to talk more about fantasy-wide themes for the week or some interesting league-wide analysis. I also want ideas from all of you in any type of video, whether it's just one time or a recurring one, that you want to see in the league. So send your wish list items over to my way. All right, so kicking off the week 2 power rankings now, there were some awesome performances, bringing me to 2 themes of the week. So on the first one, we've got what I call the rookie breakouts. So on the rookie breakouts, we had some amazing rookies sort of breaking out. Week 2 brought us some incredible joy seeing some of our draft picks really showcasing their talents. It's obviously our first year with the rookie draft and seeing them actually perform. 5 of the first rounders in Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Johan Dawson, Breece Hall, Chris Olave, with the Dameon Pierce hype train, all had spectacular weeks with some massive volume. Obviously, Johan Dawson was the only player mentioned not counting Dameon Pierce. He was selected in the second round, but those are first round receiver talents that we obviously saw. So let me reduce this real quick. So Garrett Wilson, between the 6 rookies, they scored 94 fantasy points for an average of 15.3 points. The 4 rookie receivers, right? Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Johan Dawson, and Chris Olave had an impressive 44 targets and then for the 3 receivers that were taking in our rookie draft, all leading the targets for their respective teams. Garrett Wilson led the way at 14, Chris Olave with an impressive 13 in that crowded receiving core, and Drake London at 12. As I mentioned, they're all team leading, but what's impressive is that they were all over 32% in target share for their teams. And I think while it's a little too early to say, I do think Garrett Wilson and Drake London have firmly secured their wide receiver number 1 positions on their respective teams. And we should be able to see future weeks with design touches for both. So the floors should be quite high for both of these players, Garrett Wilson and Drake London going forward, especially with what they've been able to showcase. I do think an outcome like a Jalen Waddle type of a rookie season is certainly in play for both. I think it's obviously too early and it's going to be tough to have anyone breaking out like a Jamar Chase last year or Justin Jefferson the year before that. But certainly between Garrett Wilson and Drake London, I think they both have great chances to finish in the mid wide receiver 2 territory this year and should be certainly able to contend over 1,000 yards in their rookie seasons. Chris Olave is going to continue to fight for target shares between Michael Thomas, who looks rejuvenated, and Jarvis Landry. Olave's numbers may have been inflated a little bit in week 2 with Alvin Kamara sitting out in week 2, but it's clear the talent is there. And given the ages and contract situations for the Saints veteran receiving core, Olave's dynasty value will continue to rise. And on Johan Dawson, I think he's the most underappreciated and underrated rookie that was taken in the first round in terms of fantasy, but he had another touchdown in this week in week 2 for a total of 3 touchdowns already to start out his career. I do think personally I was quite low on Johan in terms of talent, as I only looked at the big boards and the expert consensus rankings before the rookie draft on Dotson. But I think it'll be tough to continue to seeing 15 plus points, fantasy points every single week like he's had in the first 2 weeks, just given that his target share is sitting at just 11% in that crowded receiving core. So obviously it's inflated with touchdowns so far, but on top of the touchdown regression likely coming for Dotson, Carson Wentz is also likely not going to be continuing to throw 300 yards each week, as he's only had 300 plus yard passing games in the last 2 seasons. He's only had 3 of them. So we'll see what happens, but certainly all these are, I believe, hits, and they're going to continue to accrue in value as the situations on their teams improve with either retirements or free agencies and things like that going forward. But these are all keepers in my opinion, and I think we'd be lucky to have drafted them and be lucky to even start them in week 2, as some of us had done. Breece Hall, moving on to running backs, had his first touchdown of his career, catching the pass out of the backfield from Joe Flacco. The carry split between Michael Carter and Breece Hall evened out in week 2, both with 7 carries each. That said, it may take a few weeks, or it may not even happen this year, for Hall to carve out a majority of the shares out of the Jets' backfield, and Carter has continued to fend off Breece with his elevated play. So I don't imagine I'll have Breece Hall on my starting lineup any game this season unless there's injuries in play. But certainly it looks promising. They're starting to trust him more and more, and I'd be curious to what it looks like come week 10, what his workload looks like Michael Carter at that point. And back on Dameon Pierce, the hype train potentially is back on its way. Finally got the volume we'd see he'd have in week 1. He finally had 15 carries for 69 yards, with Rex Burkhead having 0. Pierce will likely to be continued as a featured early down back for that backfield, and nothing more though, as he's only played 1 play on 3rd down, and also yielded all of the 2-minute touches down to Rex Burkhead. I do think Dameon Pierce's ceiling is just an early down bruiser, but without the speed of Nick Chubb. I think he certainly got worth more than the 3rd round that was spent by Eves to pick him up, but I do have a hard time seeing any week where Pierce makes it onto Eves' star-studded roster. So overall, rookie performances like this get me hyped. I think this is the favorite part of Dynasty for me, and as the season progresses, we should be able to see a continuous sort of improvement in fantasy output, not just from these rookies, but also players that more of these rookies in this class should be able to have their moments in the spotlight in the coming weeks as the season continues to progress. All right, so theme number 2, I think you already saw it when I flipped it over accidentally, but I want to call it sort of like the written off stars or underrated ones. The Miami passing offense, the trio of Tua, Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, I think they could all finish in the top 12. I think obviously Tua's a lock, Tyreek's a lock, but the fact, I think that it was really a ceiling resetting week in terms of expectations. I never thought Tua-led Miami offense would be able to support any type of relevancy for top-end Tyreek, let alone top-end Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. So it'd be really interesting to see what happens if they have even I think 2 more weeks like this, even though they may be flashes in the pan. The fact that if they can get 2 more of these types of weeks before the conclusion of this season, I think the ceiling on the Miami offense, league-wide, fantasy-wide, community-wise, I think they're going to be resetting what their expectations are for a player like Tyreek Hill and a Jalen Waddle as well. It was great to see Aaron Jones and Nick Chubb, respectively owned by Ryan Linehan, Aaron Jones, and then Eve for Nick Chubb. It was great because I think both of their performances really, really made their weeks really interesting. Obviously, Ryan ran off with the victory there, but Nick Chubb, at the conclusion of Sunday night, the fact that he sort of scored that third touchdown, which, you can make all intents and purposes, that might have been bad for the Browns, but who cares? Eve got the third touchdown, getting 30 plus points. That made it really interesting. And I think Kyle, going into Monday Night Football, obviously with him taking the victory there, I think he had less than 12% chance in terms of the sleeper projections, just because, players like Nick Chubb just producing. Lastly, on those sort of veteran running backs, playing Dynasty exclusively last year for me, for just CCK, and having joined a redraft league this year, just make me sort of realize how different player values are between Dynasty and redraft formats. Obviously, that's a very obvious statement, but just seeing it with my own eyes, I think that's been interesting, because Aaron and Nick Chubb may be league winners this season in terms of their season output, but neither would be considered top 10 in Dynasty running backs. So, but moving on, not written off at all, but certainly underrated and underappreciated. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown looks to be an absolute stud. Even got design carries for him. One just broke loose for 50 plus yard gain. He finished week 2 as a Detroit leading rusher. I'm not sure how Amon-Ra St. Brown's production will look once Jameson Williams is back later this year, but I think at that point, Amon-Ra St. Brown may have firmly secured his position by then. And if anything, Jameson may create even more room for him, as long as Jared Goff's noodle arm is throwing at the quarterback position. So I'm really excited about Amon-Ra. I do think he could be a top 6 wide receiver this year, which means he could finish the season as a top 5 wide receiver, dynasty asset. For someone that was a throw-in last year, again, me sending Amon-Ra St. Brown along with Cam Akers and Michael Thomas and a 4th-round pick for Zeke rental last year. This is painful for me to see, but I'm all about these young prospects just breaking out, and it's great to see John holding on to Amon-Ra St. Brown, and looks like a firm building block for John. All right, so that takes us over into the standing recaps before jumping into the power rankings. So let's look at the standings to date. We've got 3 teams sitting at perfect 2-0 to start, and then we've got 2 teams at 1-1 with 3 other teams, Cup to Canada, Brandon and Travis, sitting at a winless 0-2 to start off the season. So obviously these all factor in to how I do the power rankings. So let's look at a couple stats on this. So on points for, roughly about the same. The only big difference that you see here, obviously Cup to Canada is sitting top 3 in terms of points for, and then moving to max points for, same thing. Ryan had a spectacular week in terms of max points for. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to his section, but 244 points on max points, which brought him, I believe, from 4th all the way to 1st after week 2. All right, so power rankings for week 2. I'm going to start out, not much changes to the bottom, folks, but certainly a lot at the top, and we'll share that. I'm going to start out number 8, no movement here. 4-putt, points for, you can all see it there, points against. He's obviously been tough, matched up with tough sort of plays. He's got 2nd on points against. And when you're scoring low and you're, paired up, unluckily, against the best scoring leagues, week player rosters of that week, back to back, it's going to be hard for you to get a victory out. So obviously a great start on Thursday Night Football with Mike Williams going off for 20 plus points. Really gave a scare at an upset, but not enough gas in the tank to sort of secure the upset. So, this Sunday, I was mentioning on Sleeper Chat, it was a rare NFL Sunday where I wasn't able to watch the games live because I was out playing golf. So I proceeded to shoot the worst front 9 of my life, trying to watch Red Zone and keep track of Sleeper on my phone while golfing. I honestly thought this week would be stressless, but certainly was not the case. But good luck to Travis, and he's going to have certainly easier weeks going, as we see in the points against there. All these numbers, like the points against, should even out as the season progresses. So hopefully we see 4-putt being able to sort of sneak out a couple victories here and there. All right, moving over into number 7, Commissioner Brandon stays here. It's an expected loss as Brandon sort of picked himself to lose against the reigning champion last week, but certainly on track. If you remember the video analysis that I did around each team's best sort of bull and bear case for the season, for what a perfect scenario would be, Bills Mafia, I had him at being able to sort of end the season having 5 players who are top 12 in dynasty assets at their positions by the end of the season. And certainly with the Rashad Bateman, he looks like he's going to put up a top 15 wide receiver type of number this season, especially with Lamar Jackson throwing the ball 30 plus times a game like last season compared to the 25 that he used to throw in the first 3 years of his career. And I don't think it's out of the question that Lamar may continue to throw even more than that, just because the contract situation surrounding him right now. But Rashad doesn't suffer from the concentration drops, those issues that Lamar had when the only deep option he had was Marquise Brown when he had in the past. So I think Lamar will continue to trust Rashad more and look to send it even deeper more often now that he's got Rashad Bateman going deep for him. One interesting note, Rashad Bateman clocked in at 21.48 miles per hour on his 75-yard long touchdown reception on Sunday. That was the second fastest time recorded in the season so far. Obviously, we're only 2 weeks in, but it would also make Bateman the 12th fastest player going back to 2021 season. So as a side note, that's why I also don't think the combine numbers matter that much anymore. Now that with actual advanced stats, whose field speed is legit or not. Bateman ran at 4.43 in his combine. No one would classify him as a burner, but 21.48 miles an hour is a burner. The only players who can put up those types of numbers on a consistent basis are Jonathan Taylor, MVS, Derrick Henry, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Raheem Mostert, and Duvernay also is his teammate in Baltimore. So anyways, it looks like Brandon has secured at least one of his dynasty cornerstones assets in Rashad Bateman. Obviously, TJ Hawkinson, is an easy top 5 tight end dynasty asset as well. But we're seeing the play of Garrett Wilson breaking out, Johan Dawson off to a hot start, and with Tua potentially having his perceived ceiling sort of reset. I mean, that could be all players that finish the season as a top 12 positional dynasty asset. And that's before Jameson Williams and Kenneth Walker really start to get their sort of time in the spotlight as their injury situations or their positional sort of situations change within the teams later in the season. So Brandon's going to have a lot of losses this season. Obviously, it's by design, but it looks very close that 2 weeks in, I think Bills Mafia is really going to be able to hit what I thought was his perfect sort of scenario for this year going into it. All right, moving over to number 6, we got Jerry, full Jerry. You can see the stats there. I feel bad for John because he just had horrible injury luck and a bad start to sort of start out the season. Obviously, he's better than last season. I believe he started 1-4 or 0-3 to start the season. But seeing Trey Lance out with an injury like that and being out for the rest of the season, especially with all the things surrounding him in the offseason with Jimmy G staying or going and ultimately re-signing to be a backup, on top of Justin Herbert having sort of, I think, a fractured rib. So, he's a tough boy. Maybe he comes back by week 3, but, that's a painful situation to sort of go through. That said, I think, I look at the progression of Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, even Cam Akers getting a little bit more repetition and played this week too. I think those player progressions will now dictate John's playoff chances for this season. Certainly sitting at 1-1, no one's going to count him out. But no mistake about it, this is absolutely Amon-Ra St. Brown's team. He's got the new NFL record with 8 straight games, over 8 receptions, and a TD in 6 straight games. So this team will always have a chance to win whenever Amon-Ra St. Brown goes off like that, like he did in week 2. And I honestly feel like we're potentially watching a fantasy stud blossom in real time. So I love Amon-Ra St. Brown. And as long as Amon-Ra St. Brown stays healthy and continues to get the volume that he does, and he's got the progression of Lawrence, Kirk, and Akers, I think John's going to be in contention for a playoff spot. Moving over to the other 1-1 team, we're going to go with Mr. Ambassador here. Man, he had a tough situation. He could have started out 2-0, which I think would have been huge for his playoff chances, especially with Eve starting off 0-2 on the other side of the spectrum. There is a tough week 3 coming ahead. Where he's sort of facing, who's he facing? He's going to be facing a playoff contender and the inaugural champion in Ryan next week. So that's a tough week 3. He'll likely need to bench Ezekiel Elliott now, but certainly has a lot of options for flex on his bench given the depth that he has, and we're seeing the progression of some of the players on his roster there. So it's going to be interesting, but 2-0 start heading into week 3 would have been amazing. 1-1 now facing the champ from last year. I think Sergey is really, really wishing that he could have had that one back, and I think if it wasn't for the Vikings game on Monday Night Football, Jalen Hurts doing his part, and just the interceptions at the end really got it close, and ultimately was not able to sort of come out with a last minute Monday Night Football victory. And Kirk Cousins just didn't want to be great. He was just getting playing poorly as I've ever seen him play, and I don't think that's going to be the case going forward. Probably that's going to be his floor type of an outcome, but would have been great to see Mr. Ambassador starting off 2-0 and really put a high pressure on Eve, certainly. All right, moving over to number 4. I've got Cup to Canada dropping 1 spot. It's a tough loss on a 0-1 season. Or 0-2 season to start, and tough loss that he experienced on Monday Night Football. Again, I think he came into Monday Night Football game, kickoff around 88% probability to win, and just was not happening. I think Derrick Henry is confusing. I think there's a couple names that I want to sort of put on as like a ride or die players for Eves worth keeping an eye on. Players that obviously he's not going to not be able to bench, or he's not going to be able to bench because of their name value and their production, historical production, and their roles on the teams. But it's really going to dictate what happens. There's some positives too. But starting with Devontae Adams, what's his actual role for the Raiders going to be this season? Is it someone that's going to be game planned away like in week 2 like we saw, or the 17-target monster that we saw against the Chargers in week 1? Matt Stafford, he's now league leading at 5 interceptions thrown in the first 2 games. Derrick Henry, maybe he needs to be benching him. Can you trust him? He's getting the workload, just not efficient. And certainly he's got enough depth in his bench to have more sort of reliable producers filling in for him until Derrick Henry proves otherwise. But in terms of positives, Michael Thomas certainly looks like a starter. He's getting a lion's load of target share for the New Orleans offense there. Looks rejuvenated, obviously not contending for a wide receiver 1 like the 2019 season, but certainly going to be plug-and-play flex for him anytime he wants. And now maybe the positive side for Cup to Canada, now that Trey Lance is out, with Jimmy G back at the helm leading, there's a chance 2021 Debo may be back now for the season. When Trey Lance was taken over, especially with him getting 13 carries, in week 1, we thought a lot of the upside for Debo, along with the rest of the receiver core, was going to be sort of suppressed a little bit. But now that Jimmy G's there, we know there's going to be much less rushing attempts by the quarterback. And the offense hasn't changed a bit since last year when Debo finished, I believe, top 3 receiver last year. So I think with Cup to Canada going up against Travis next week, it's going to be a quick bounce back to a 1-2, which is certainly much more manageable. But we'll see. I still certainly have Cup to Canada as the 4th likeliest to make the playoff roster, even starting at 0-2, just because of the points for and the max points for production that you can see there. And he's got the worst luck of all of being faced with 2 of the highest recording opposing teams in the first 2 weeks, between me in the first week and then the second week with Kyle. So it's going to be tough when you're faced against the high-scoring league team every single week, but that's certainly not going to be the case going forward, so we should see some regression to the norm here in a positive way for Cup to Canada. All right, moving over to number 3. I debated having Ryan at number 2 because I thought he deserved it, so I'm going to move him just 1 spot up to number 3. He had a massive league record of 241.12 max points for, but just 159, it's still very, very high. 159 points for in week 2. I think the thing that caused me to sort of be hesitant on moving Brady Star Dynasty to the number 1 or to number 2, even though he's also 2-0, is the quarterback situation that he has. His quarterbacks have been amazing best ball options, with Wentz going off, Jared Goff also having some positive first 2 weeks. while Tom Brady, his trusted starters in Tom Brady and Russell Wilson are really struggling to start off the season. In order for him to benefit from that, that means that he's going to have to start Wentz and address the disappointing starts of Russell Wilson and Tom Brady. And maybe also he needs to start Jared Goff as well. But does that mean that you have to bench Tom Brady, the GOAT, and Russell Wilson? I think both Brady and Wilson will have had tremendous careers that we can count on. So obviously the panic meter here is low, very low. But really, until they can start stepping up and playing to their usual career numbers, it will be a headache for Ryan. And to me, I think that quarterback position may be the only vulnerability he has all season. But ultimately, I think you see higher points for average for Brady's third dynasty going, especially because he looks like he may have top 4 wide receivers in the top 12 this season between Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and T. Higgins. And those are the 1 and 2 receivers of just 2 teams between Miami and Cincinnati. So interesting start for sure. I'm really curious what happens to the quarterback situation for Ryan, but the reigning champ is certainly, star-studded all across, including his depth. So as he's mentioned in Sleeper Chat, we're going to see Jalen Waddle promoted to the starting roster spot now soon. But we'll be curious to see sort of what happens to his quarterback decisions going forward. Do you continue to trust your veterans, or do you start to sort of write the hot hand in Carson Wentz or Jared Goff starting for him next week? All right. Moving over to number 2, trust the process. I've dropped myself a spot here after week 2, especially with a relatively disappointing week around 140 points. Still sitting, a second in points for, fourth in max points for, especially with the massive weeks of Kyle and Ryan this week. Points against, also relatively, tough luck facing the third highest points for so far, or points against so far, but thankfully being able to sit at 2-0 certainly is great. That said, I think there's a lot of potential vulnerabilities coming out, even more than what I mentioned for me in my roster in week 1. Kyler's not doing his homework. And Call of Duty beta is out on PS5, so that's not good signs for me. So I don't think his play is going to continue to get any better soon. But is he going to be another top 5 this type of season, for the quarterback position, or is he going to be a top 10 type of quarterback? And I think that's going to have big repercussions for how my my production this year is handled. He's basically had horrible 7 quarters to start out the new season, and thankfully he woke up in the 4th quarter into overtime in week 2 to really get these numbers up for me. But number 2, I think Kyle Pitts is getting schemed away 100%. Week 2 was brutal. On a day where Cordero got just 1 target, you'd figure Pitts should be able to command at least a target volume, that's respectable, but finished the game with just 3. And now he's at 4 receptions for the season on just 38 yards. You might see me plugging in Pat Freiermuth soon into my starting tight end spot if Pitts isn't able to produce in the next couple of weeks. The last sort of negative note for me, I think that there's a question mark. Are the Colts bad? They can't seem to get anything going with Matt Ryan under center. And week 2, especially with Michael Pittman now, it looked like Jonathan Taylor just faced the stack box every single early down. And especially with them being blown out, JT only got 9 carries. Obviously, he's going to be efficient. He's still one of the best, if not the best running back. So he's able to produce 6 yards a carry off of those 9 carries. But if the Colts aren't going to be competitive and winning games, it's certainly going to take a huge hit to JT's carry volume. And obviously JT is JT talent-wise, but it's concerning to see the Colts offense not be able to get going yet. Obviously, new QBs and new systems maybe just take a little bit while longer, as we were seeing with Russell Wilson in Denver as well. But I'd selfishly like to see the Colts doing well fast. All right, so that brings us to our new number 1 in no other than Moncton Meerkat, sitting at number 1 with the number 1 in points for a huge week in week 2, and sitting at a perfect 2-0 to start. A few notes on Kyle, though. I think the QB, obviously he took off the victory in week 2, but QB2 issues are coming to haunt him right after the Dax injury in week 1. It sort of reminds me of E's bad luck last season to start. E, if you remember, started Fitzmagic in week 1, got injured, only to have the fill-ins and the streamers after that continue to either have bust weeks or just injuries all throughout the season. I do think on his roster, Ryan Tannehill may be the most serviceable, but he also had a really disappointing week 2. But thankfully, Lamar did ball out. Don't count on Lamar Jackson having 40 plus points or anyone over 40 point, on a week-to-week basis. But I think Lamar balling out certainly helped there. And having Lamar as your QB1 option, you're going to be afforded the ability to have your QB position sort of be disappointing and still take out victories like he did in week 2. There are a couple things that I just want to sort of note on, maybe interesting storylines that are developing here. I do want to talk about sort of Eckler's rushing efficiency. It's another game below 3 yards per carry, while Josh Kelly, his backup on early downs, managed to have another game above 5 yards a carry. Eckler is always going to have to stay relevant from a fantasy standpoint to place him in top 12 running backs, given his receiving volume, but unless he gets his rushing numbers up, we may see more early downs conceded over to Josh Kelly, which obviously is going to be a big hit to Kyle's, RB2, sort of the starting RB positions there. That said, I think it was positive to see the CMC and Barkley getting continued great volume, even though they might not have had particularly great week 2s in terms of fantasy volume. But they're back to getting the volumes that they used to get before their injuries. But injury prone stars were always the theme for Kyle's season heading into this at the offseason. And we saw the first injury in his roster being one of the only injury prone ones, with James Conner leaving the game early with an ankle issue. On James Conner specifically, he's already on a surgically repaired ankle, so that's not good to see. But that said, team-wide, Kyle certainly has a high-end talent to be absolutely there at the top. This team will be a championship contender as long as they stay healthy. And on a positive note, which wasn't mentioned in here, I think especially with injuries to Jerry Jeudy and the production that we saw in Courtland Sutton, even before Jeudy got out, I think in the fourth quarter, looks like Courtland Sutton is taking the early lead as the wide receiver 1 option for Russell Wilson in Denver. And if Russell ever figures it out this season, which is probably a bet that I would take, then the wide receiver number 1 spot in Denver should be certainly highly coveted. So it's good to see Kyle benefiting from that trade in the offseason that he did. But that said, Montgomery Cats is going to be coming up against me next week, and I'm certainly happy I get to face Kyle next week with Mike Evans suspended and Pittman and Connor potentially questionable to return due to their injuries so far. So strong roster. Congrats to the new number 1. And then here are sort of the overall rankings and the points for to date. 3 teams sitting at 2-0, and then we got 3 teams sitting at 0-2, with 2 teams in the middle at 1-1. Expect to see some regression to the norm for Cup to Canada in a positive sense, and hopefully we make this a real playoff chase into the midseason and make it sort of catch up as we head towards the end of the season this year. All right, so that does it for the power rankings. Good luck this week, and look out for Commissioner Brandon's weekly predictions and picks coming out with the recaps from week 2 as well. And I'll see you guys Thursday, Sunday, and Monday. Bye.